I smiled when my son handed me the bottle of water. He said it was to help me recharge on our hike. But the night before, I found the life insurance policy he took out on me, in secret, worth $3 million. My name, his signature. A payout clause triggered by an accidental fall. So when I smiled that morning, it wasn't the smile of a trusting mother. It was the smile of a woman who already knew she wasn't coming back down the mountain the same way she went up. And neither was he. The sun was just starting to rise above the tree line, a soft golden wash spilling over the trailhead as we parked near the base of Hollow Pine Ridge. Birds chirped lazily in the cool morning air, and the sky was the color of bruised lilac, beautiful, deceptive. Julian stepped out of the driver's seat with a stretch and a yawn, looking every bit the devoted son, hiking boots neatly tied, windbreaker zipped halfway, and that ever-easy smile he wore like a mask. He popped the trunk, pulled out our backpacks, and handed me a bottle of electrolyte water. "Here, Mom," he said warmly. "Figured you'd need this. Gotta stay hydrated, right?" I took the bottle slowly, letting it rest in my palm for a second too long. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, with a voice so steady it scared even me. He didn't notice the way my fingers didn't curl around it, or the fact that I didn't unscrew the cap right away. He was too busy rummaging through his gear, checking the straps, the snacks, the little things that make it look like you're prepared. What he didn't know was that I had already prepared for everything. I'd found it less than 24 hours earlier. His laptop was left open on the kitchen table, and I, like any aging mother cleaning up after her adult son, had simply meant to move it. But there it was, bright as daylight, an email confirmation from Faro Life Insurance Group. Policy number 842791, named beneficiary, Julian Reed, insured, Elaine Reed, death payout, $3 million. It took less than 5 minutes at the insurance office to verify it. The agent was polite but firm. Yes, the policy was real. Yes, it was initiated 2 months ago. No, they don't require the insured's signature if a legal heir is involved. Just proof of relationship. A forged consent form. Maybe a whispered lie about mental decline. He had done it quietly, methodically. My son had written my death into a contract. And now here we were, climbing into danger under the guise of reconnecting. He called it a nature reset, said we both needed fresh air. He even packed granola bars. As we started up the first slope, Julian kept chatting lightly about trail grades and how refreshing it was to get away from everything. I smiled and nodded when appropriate, eyes scanning the trail, memorizing the bends, the cliffs. My mind filed everything like a soldier walking into enemy territory. But my heart, it was strangely still, because the old me, the version of myself that would have begged to understand why, to fix it, to give him another chance. That woman had already died the moment I read the words, "Accidental death clause, activated upon fall." About 20 minutes into the hike, Julian paused and turned around. "Want to take a break? It's a long trail. No rush." I nodded again and settled on a large rock just off the path. He handed me the bottle once more. "Really, Mom," he said, "you gotta drink. We don't want you dehydrating up here." I took the bottle in both hands this time, smiled wide, and twisted the cap open, brought it to my lips, tilted it just enough for a convincing sip. I said, nodding. "Thanks, I needed that." He seemed satisfied, relaxed even. I capped the bottle and tucked it into my backpack. He wouldn't know that I hadn't swallowed a single drop. The irony, of course, is that I'd taught him everything he knew about surviving in the wild. I'd taken him camping, taught him to fish, made him memorize how to find north without a compass. I told him stories about how to keep warm with pine needles and how to use dandelion roots for tea. But I also taught him kindness, loyalty, that you don't abandon people just because they're old or slower. That love wasn't transactional. He learned the first lessons, but not the last. Julian pointed up the trail. "Come on. There's an overlook not too far from here. You're gonna love it. Amazing view." I stood, brushing imaginary dust from my knees. "Lead the way, darling." As we continued walking, I let my thoughts wander. Not to fear or regret, but to calculation. He would try something soon. He had to. The trail narrowed ahead, hugging a drop so steep you wouldn't hear your own scream hit the rocks below. No railing, no signage, just one misplaced footstep away from silence. He had picked the perfect place, except he wasn't the only one who knew how this story would end. He thought he was the author of my final chapter. What he didn't know was that I had already turned the page. There was a time when Julian's voice could melt away every doubt I had, just by calling me Mom. That single word used to echo with innocence, warmth, need. But even the sweetest lullabies turned sharp when sung too long without sincerity. It started small, like most betrayals do. A missed birthday, a forgotten anniversary, a promise to visit that never turned into footsteps on my porch. But I, Elaine Reed, master of rationalization, had always found ways to fill in the gaps for him. He's busy. He's building a life. He'll come around. And then one day, he did. He called me on a Monday afternoon, a rarity in itself, and asked if I'd be free that weekend. He wanted to come over with Brielle, said they were expecting. "We just want to spend more time with family," he said. A warmth flooded my chest. I clutched the phone like a lifeline. "Of course, darling. Come anytime." I spent the next 3 days cleaning every corner of the house. I cooked his childhood favorites. I even laid out the guest towels, folded the way he liked them, with the lavender soap on top. When they arrived, I nearly cried. Brielle looked radiant. Julian looked composed. Too composed. I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe the baby was coming sooner than expected. Maybe fatherhood had matured him. He handed me a small bouquet of lilies. "You've always loved these," he said. I nodded, accepting them with a shaky smile. He hadn't remembered my favorite flower in 10 years. I hated lilies. But I said thank you anyway. We sat, we ate, we laughed. It felt like the beginning of something, until I went to grab dessert and overheard what I wasn't meant to hear. "She's buying it," Brielle whispered. Julian chuckled. "It's almost sad how easy this is. We just play the perfect family and she folds." My hands trembled as I set down the cake knife. I forced a smile as I walked back into the room and served them each a slice. Their gratitude was thick and theatrical. "Mom, you really went all out," Julian said. I nodded. "Of course. Anything for you." But that night, I lay awake with a pit of dread blooming in my stomach. The next morning, I logged into my bank account. $20,000 gone. Wired to Julian's company for investment. I hadn't even noticed. He'd called it a paperwork thing weeks ago. I'd approved it without reading the form closely. I told myself it was fine. Maybe he really was turning over a new leaf. Brielle was pregnant. Families help each other, right? But the weeks that followed only unraveled more. Each visit became more polished, more calculated. They always brought something small, a flower, a card, a gift bag. Julian called more frequently, even texted photos of baby prep, a nursery being painted, a stroller they'd picked out. Then came the emotional hooks. "Mom, we're a little tight this month. Could you help with the hospital deposit? Brielle's been really stressed. That herbal tea you used to buy? Could you send a few boxes?" My job's been cutting hours. I hate asking, but every request came laced with guilt, dipped in sugar. And I, desperate for connection, for redemption, complied every time. I was the fool. Until the night I found Brielle's Instagram account. Not the one she let me follow. The real one. Hidden under a different name. Tagged photos of spa days, designer shoes, champagne brunches with captions like, "Nothing like milking love from those who owe you." And in one picture, Julian holding a whiskey glass, smirking. The caption read, "Who needs inheritance when you've got emotional leverage?" It wasn't the words that hurt most. It was the ease in his face. Like none of it weighed on him. Like I had never mattered at all. I stared at that photo for a long time, my hands cold, my breathing shallow. Something inside me began to calcify, harden. And that's when the shift happened, not just in my perception, but in my entire being. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. Lock down everything, I said. No new withdrawals, no new wires, not without my in-person signature. I contacted my lawyer. Update my will, I instructed. Remove Julian, add a charitable trust. The final step was psychological. I stopped referring to him as my son. In my thoughts, in my journals, even in prayer. He became Julian, a man who happened to share my last name, nothing more. But he didn't know any of this. He still thought the show was going well. The baby bump that never quite looked real, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the polite laughs over dinner. Julian had always been good at acting, but he forgot where I came from, what I had survived, a cheating husband who left me with an infant and a mortgage, a career sacrifice to raise a boy who never once asked if I had dreams of my own. Friends who faded when I no longer hosted parties. And grief, the kind that carves silence into your bones and teaches you to endure storms without an umbrella. I wasn't just any mother. I was a woman who had learned to listen in quiet, to read beneath the surface, to smile while planning my next move. When Julian asked to move in temporarily, I nodded. When Brielle suggested we talk about the house title, I agreed. When they asked if I could help cover prenatal expenses, I wrote the check. But every nod, every smile, every signature was a seed planted in soil they never tested for thorns. And while they rehearsed their script of the perfect child and glowing daughter-in-law, I was already outlining the final act of their play. It happened on a Tuesday, which made it feel even more absurd. Not a dramatic Sunday storm or a symbolic Friday the 13th, just a plain, unremarkable weekday. The kind of day you expect to bring groceries in, not uncover the blueprint for your own murder. I was tidying the living room, not snooping. I've never been one to invade someone's privacy, even when that someone grew up under my roof. Julian had left his laptop open, the screen still lit. Likely checking work emails, or so I assumed, but the words on the screen stopped me cold. Top-rated insurance providers for high-value elder policies without direct consent. I blinked. My first thought, surely it's research for something else. A policy for Brielle's parents? Maybe he was helping someone? But the more I looked, the faster that fragile hope crumbled. There were bookmarks, threads, even a spreadsheet comparing payout timelines. It wasn't just idle curiosity. I clicked one of the email tabs open. The subject line read, Policy Confirmation, Elaine Reed. My throat tightened. I opened it. Dear Mr. Julian Reed, this email confirms the successful initiation of your life insurance policy for Elaine Reed, classified under Tier 4 coverage. Your selected plan includes an accidental death clause, effective immediately. Payout upon death, $3 million. Primary beneficiary, Julian Reed. Policy ID 84927-RX. No further consent documentation is required due to legal heir status under existing state provision allowances. The room spun. My hands, always so steady, trembled as I clicked through the attachments. There it was, my date of birth, my social security number, even a digitally forged consent signature, eerily similar to mine but with a faintly mismatched curve in the E. That's when I felt it. Not fear, not even betrayal. It was clarity. Julian had already prepared for a future without me, a future where I accidentally slipped and fell, maybe from stairs, or off a trail, or in a tub with no witnesses. I was no longer his mother. I was a payout. I didn't confront him. Not then. Not even that evening when he brought me a store-bought salad and said it was too hot to cook. I just smiled and thanked him, watched how he waited to see if I'd eat it first. I didn't touch a bite. Instead, I printed every document I found and stored them in my safety deposit box. I went to the insurance company the next morning, disguised as a curious policyholder. The clerk's voice was apologetic but clear. Yes, there's a policy under your name. You're the insured, not the policyholder. Mr. Reed is the beneficiary. Yes, you can request to see a copy of the file, though we'll need a legal filing if you want it frozen. Legal filing. I tucked the idea away. Would you like to see the payout structure, Ms. Reed? The clerk asked politely. I nodded. He handed me a printed chart. At the top, accelerated benefits activated upon accidental death. I folded the paper neatly, thanked him, walked to my car in silence. The rest of that day passed like a dream. I fed the neighbor's cat, watered the hydrangeas, answered spam calls, but my brain stayed locked on one phrase: accelerated benefits. The faster I died, the faster he'd collect. That evening, Julian suggested a hike. Brielle thought it might be nice, he said casually, avoiding my eyes. She said you've been cooped up a lot lately. Nature would do you good. I nodded slowly. That sounds lovely. He smiled with visible relief. Oh, and we'll drive out to Hollow Pine. The trails are safe, barely any incline. I remembered Hollow Pine. A remote ridge, no cell service, one trailhead camera that hadn't worked since last spring, 3 disappearances over the last decade, all labeled tragic but unpreventable. A favorite among insurance fraud forums, if the message board on Julian's screen was to be believed. The next morning, he handed me a bottle of water with a label I didn't recognize. Said it had extra electrolytes. Then he watched me with a softness that almost passed for real concern. That's when I knew for certain he planned for it to happen up there. My death, his rebirth. And I almost admired the efficiency. I excused myself after breakfast, went to the bathroom, and dry heaved for several minutes. Not from fear. My body was simply catching up to the reality of what my mind had accepted. Then I did what any rational woman would do. I called my attorney, asked about estate revisions, filed a preemptive claim review to notify the Insurance Bureau of possible fraud. I purchased a GPS tracker hidden in a brooch and filed an email to my friend Karen, pre-scheduled to send 24 hours later unless I canceled it. Subject line: if I'm gone, it wasn't an accident. Julian didn't suspect a thing. He even cooked dinner that night, chicken parmesan, a dish he hadn't made since he was 17. He claimed he wanted to try. I let the food sit, said I had an upset stomach. He pretended not to be disappointed. Later that evening, I saw him sneak a bottle of something from the kitchen into his backpack, a label with medical-sounding jargon. It wasn't until I matched the logo on a pharmacy bag in the trash that I realized what it was. Diazepam, high dose. And that's when the final click fell into place. It wasn't going to be a push, or a stumble. It was going to be something slow, sedated, gentle, like a nap on the edge of a cliff. The house felt colder after the insurance discovery, though nothing had changed visibly. The same beige walls, the same soft hum from the refrigerator, the same crack in the upstairs banister Julian had promised to fix 10 years ago. But everything had changed. When Julian and Brielle returned that night, the shift in me must have been almost imperceptible. I was still the same hostess. I poured chamomile tea, asked about their day, laughed politely at Julian's story about a clumsy intern. Brielle showed me a new prenatal vitamin she'd ordered. Doctor approved, she said. I nodded. Sounds good. All performance, all a test. That weekend, Julian proposed they move in temporarily. The nursery's eating up our apartment space, he said, sipping coffee like it was just any other conversation. And with you here alone, it'd be good for everyone. Win-win. I smiled softly, cradling my mug. Of course, it'd be lovely to have more company. What he didn't know was that I had already moved every sensitive document from my file cabinet into a bank vault. I'd already told my lawyer to put my home in a blind trust with me as sole controller. I even installed a new camera, hidden inside a porcelain vase on the mantel. Let them move in. Let the show begin. They arrived on Monday with 4 suitcases and 2 duffel bags. Most of it was Brielle's. Coats, spa robes, branded skincare that cost more than my week's groceries. She hummed as she unpacked, barely containing her glee. Julian walked the house like a buyer, tapped on walls, checked the HVAC panel. He was measuring, claiming. By day 3, they were fully settled. And on the morning of the 4th day, Julian made his real move. Mom, he said, sitting beside me at the kitchen table, this house, it's too much for you. The maintenance, taxes, repairs, you shouldn't be burdened with all that. We've been thinking, maybe it's time we transferred the title, just paperwork, so I can manage it all. I tilted my head. Transferred to you? He smiled faintly. Yeah, I mean, you're still here, of course. It just simplifies things legally, and in case anything ever happens. He trailed off, letting the words hang like mist in the air. I took a slow sip of tea. Brielle, I called sweetly. Come in here. She glided in, barefoot and glowing. Isn't it such a good idea, Helen? Honestly, we just want to take care of you. You deserve to rest. The way she said rest made my stomach turn. I nodded again. Of course. I'll start looking into it. Their relief was instant. Brielle actually clapped. That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered the halls of my own home, watching the shadows stretch along the walls like unfamiliar guests. I used to walk those floors at 2 a.m. when Julian was sick as a boy, checking his temperature, refilling soup. Now I walked them to listen for whispers, to ensure nothing had been stolen, to measure the depth of their entitlement. And then came the breaking point. It was Milo, my dog, my shadow, my last unambiguous source of love in this world. He didn't greet me that morning. No wagging tail, no soft bark. His food bowl was untouched. I searched every room, under the bed, behind the curtains, in the laundry basket where he liked to nap. Nothing. I finally confronted Julian at the breakfast table. Have you seen Milo? I asked carefully. Julian didn't even look up. Oh, the dog? Took him for a drive. Dropped him at a shelter. My heart clenched. A shelter? Yeah, he shrugged, chewing his eggs. Place was too crowded. He was always in the way, tripping people up. You don't need the hassle? You're 60? How long were you going to keep him anyway? I couldn't speak. Brielle dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Honestly, Helen, it was for the best. That mutt was just so much hair. You're welcome. Something snapped, not a loud break, not a scream, just the quiet sound of a dam losing one final crack. I stood without a word, walked to my bedroom, and shut the door. Behind it, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into pillows. Behind it, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into pillows. I simply stared at the ceiling and realized they had declared war, and they thought I was still trying to make peace. That evening, Julian brought me a small folder. Just some draft forms for the house, he said casually. No pressure. Whenever you're ready. I took it with a smile, hands steady. Inside, I found the signature line already filled. Mine. I scanned the page. A cleverly written transfer of ownership, masquerading as a maintenance agreement. The moment he left, I shredded it into precise, silent ribbons. The next day, I gave him a new document, professionally printed, neatly bound, my gift to the family. They didn't notice the fine print. Intent only. Non-binding. Display copy. And when Brielle asked over dinner, "So, when do you plan to move out?" I leaned in gently. "Oh, I was thinking I'd stay a bit longer, if that's all right." Julian hesitated. "Sure, whatever works." I smiled wide. They were relaxed now. Greedy people always relax once they think they've won. And I had never been calmer. The scent of cinnamon still brings me back to that kitchen in Eastbrook, the one with the cracked linoleum tiles and leaky faucet that always dripped like a broken heartbeat. That was the first house Julian and I ever shared, just the two of us. Back then, I used to think if I baked enough, loved enough, gave enough, I could build a world safe from betrayal. I see now that all I built was a golden cage. When Julian was 5, he used to run to me with scraped knees, arms outstretched, like I was the only medicine that worked. He used to call me Mama with a kind of raw affection that could melt cement. I remember once he climbed into my bed in the middle of a thunderstorm, trembling, and whispered, "I won't let the monsters get you." If only he had meant it. His descent wasn't sudden. It came in slow, bitter waves, the way erosion eats at a shoreline, not with a bang, but with persistence. By 14, he was already lying about small things, taking cash from my purse, blaming classmates for things he did. I remember sitting across from the school counselor who tried to gently suggest that maybe Julian needed firmer boundaries. I just smiled and said, "He's a good boy, just a little lost." That was my refrain for years. He's just struggling. He's just young. He'll grow out of it. But he didn't grow. He sharpened. By college, he was using words like weapons. He flunked out his second year, claimed the professors were biased, then came home with his tail between his legs and a credit card balance nearing 5 figures. I remember the first time I paid off his debt. I sold my jewelry, nothing fancy, just heirlooms that had belonged to my mother. He cried when I handed him the check. "Mom, I'll never forget this," he said. He did. Because 6 months later, he was back in debt, this time with loan sharks. I begged him to tell me the truth. He said it was a medical emergency. I wired him the money that same night. 2 weeks later, I saw a tagged photo of him in Cancun, sunburned, drunk, laughing in the arms of some girl I'd never met. That was when I began keeping a journal, not for therapy, for evidence. I began writing down each lie, each dollar, each broken promise, page after page, trying to make sense of where I went wrong. The lowest point came 2 years later. I had finally said no. No more bailouts, Julian. No more second chances. He showed up at 3 a.m., pounding on my door. When I didn't open, he shattered the flower pot beside the porch and screamed so loudly the neighbors called the police. When the officers asked if I wanted to press charges, I shook my head and said he was just emotional. The next morning, he apologized with a store-bought card that read, "Best mom ever." I still have it in a drawer, untouched, like a bone left after the feast. And yet, I kept loving him. Because no matter how cruel he became, I clung to the memory of the boy with scraped knees and thunderstorm fears. I thought maybe, if I just held on long enough, that version of him would return. But it never did. Instead, I became smaller. I stopped inviting friends over, afraid they'd see the disappointment I tried so hard to hide. I stopped buying things for myself. I canceled trips, postponed surgeries. I poured every spare resource into Julian's endless black hole of needs, and he never once asked if I was okay. Not when I sprained my hip carrying groceries, not when I got laid off from the school district, not when Milo, the one true constant, had to have emergency surgery. The silence was louder than any insult. One afternoon I collapsed while trying to shovel the driveway. A neighbor found me, helped me up, and said gently, "Don't you have a son?" I said nothing. I didn't have the strength to explain. I hadn't heard from Julian in months by then, not until he texted, "Can I borrow $5,000? Something came up." No, "How are you, Mom?" No, "Happy birthday." Just a request, a transaction, like I was a human ATM. I didn't reply. That was the first time I chose silence. And oddly, it felt powerful. But that power didn't last. The moment Brielle showed up with her fake belly and soft words, all my resolve shattered. I was so starved for connection, I believed the lie. I believed I could still be needed. That was the real cost. Not the money, not the humiliation. It was the erasure of myself. Years of giving, bending, sacrificing, until I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. Until I had to dig through old journals just to remember that once I had dreams of my own. A teaching career that could have flourished, a small bakery I once dreamed of opening, a trip to Tuscany I planned but never booked, all postponed for later. Later never came, until now. Now, with the scent of cinnamon haunting my kitchen, I finally understood that love, real love, is not the same as martyrdom. And if Julian thought he could extinguish me quietly for a payout, then he had forgotten the most dangerous part of who I am. I may be quiet, I may be soft, but I never forget. The sound of eggs sizzling in the pan used to mean comfort, weekend breakfasts, cartoons in the background, Julian in pajamas with messy hair asking if he could pour the syrup. Now it was just another reminder that I had become their personal chef. I stood at the stove that morning, flipping omelets while Brielle yawned behind me, scrolling through her phone like she didn't live in someone else's home. Julian waltzed in minutes later, whistling. He always whistled when he thought he was winning. They sat at the table like royalty. I served them like staff. "You know," Julian said between bites. I was thinking we should do a full renovation. Knock down that useless study, open up the kitchen, make this place market ready. Real modern Brielle nodded. It's not like you use the space anyway, Helen. I smiled faintly. Of course, that sounds reasonable. They shared a quick glance, pleased by how easy I'd become. And that's when I knew it was time. After breakfast, I retreated to my room, pulled out the leather-bound folder I had kept hidden inside my sewing kit, and slipped the real deed to the house into my bag. The trust papers, the will, the fraud report, everything. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. That afternoon, I asked Julian to join me for tea in the garden. It was something I used to do when he was younger. Back then, he would complain about bugs and sunburns. But now, with the scent of ownership thick in the air, he came willingly. We sat beneath the old elm tree. I poured the tea slowly. It was a favorite of his, oolong with honey. He smiled as he sipped it. So, I said casually, I've been thinking about the house, about everything. His eyes lit up. Yeah? I've decided it's time to let go, I said. You were right, Julian. I shouldn't be burdened anymore. I've prepared all the paperwork. He nearly dropped his cup. You did? I nodded, producing the folder. His fingers trembled as he opened it. He skimmed the pages, his breath shallow, his pupils dilating like a man about to cross a finish line he didn't earn. Brielle came running when she heard him call her name. She didn't even try to hide her greed. She slid beside him, eyes scanning the documents with a shark's hunger. It's really done? She asked breathlessly. Yes, I said softly. You two now have everything you ever wanted. She laughed, a high, relieved sound. Finally. God, that took forever. Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulder. You're amazing, Mom. Seriously, we'll make sure you're taken care of. Of course, Brielle added quickly. You can stay in the guest room as long as you want. I tilted my head. That's kind of you. She stood. Actually, we were just talking about setting up the nursery there, but we'll figure it out. Julian hesitated. Yeah, I mean, maybe you could look into one of those assisted living condos? You'd be around people your age. I smiled. I'll consider it. They went back inside, drunk on victory. I stayed behind, letting the sun wash over my face. A breeze picked up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt its coolness as something real, not filtered through fear or resentment. That evening, while they were out celebrating with dinner and wine on my credit card, I placed a call. Everything's signed, I told my attorney. They think they own the house. He chuckled. Display copy? Of course. The next morning, I left a new set of papers on the kitchen table. This time, real ones. A letter of eviction, a fraud summary, a cease and desist regarding the misuse of my identity for insurance fraud. The envelope was thick and quiet and waiting. When they returned, drunk and sun-flushed, they barely noticed me. Until Julian opened the envelope. What the hell is this? He snapped. Brielle grabbed the papers, flipping through them in disbelief. What is this garbage? I stood from the armchair, slow and steady. That, I said, is your exit. You tricked us, Julian yelled. You said you were signing everything over. I walked toward them, calm. Number, I gave you what you deserved. Nothing. He slammed his fist on the table. I'm your son. I looked him in the eyes for the first time in weeks. Number, you were a boy I raised. Yes. But somewhere along the way, you became something else. And now, I choose not to recognize you. Brielle laughed bitterly. You'll regret this. No one will take care of you. You'll die alone. I stepped forward, my voice like steel wrapped in velvet. I've already died once, quietly, inside, when I realized the boy I gave my life to would have happily taken my life for a check. And guess what? I came back. Julian tried to plead, but I raised a hand. We're done. He stared at me, stunned by the finality in my voice. I turned toward the hallway and paused. Milo didn't deserve what you did to him. but thank you for showing me who you really are." And then I walked away, out of the room, out of the illusion, out of the lie I'd lived for far too long. The days that followed were colder, not just in weather, but in atmosphere. Brielle barely spoke to me. Julian sulked around the house like a child who'd been denied his favorite toy, snapping at everything from the creaky floorboards to the too quiet mornings. Their tone had shifted. They still ate the food I cooked, but didn't say thank you. They still used the hot water and the guest towels and my Wi-Fi, but they no longer asked. Entitlement had always lived in them, but now it festered into resentment. But I didn't mind the silence. It gave me room to plan. 3 days after the rejection, I received a call from a woman named Lydia Chen, the HR director at Langford Medical, where Brielle was hoping to climb the ladder into an executive clinical role. "I'm calling regarding a reference for Brielle Keene," she said. I kept my voice neutral. "Of course, how can I help?" "She listed you as her landlord and family contact," Lydia continued. "We're finalizing her promotion packet and just wanted to verify her address and role as caregiver." I paused. "Caregiver?" I echoed. "Yes. She claimed to be your primary support provider. In fact, she stated that she moved in to care for you full-time due to cognitive decline." I swallowed a laugh. "Cognitive decline," I repeated. "Interesting." There was a silence on the line. "Is that inaccurate?" "I'll let you draw your own conclusions, Ms. Chen," I said calmly. "But for the record, Brielle is neither my caregiver nor my dependent. In fact, if she remains in my home past this month, I'll be forced to seek legal eviction." Lydia thanked me and ended the call. By sunset, Brielle was pacing the living room. "I don't understand why they're asking so many questions all of a sudden," she hissed. "My packet was solid. I even submitted that letter." "What letter?" Julian asked, clearly annoyed. "The one about me being Helen's caregiver. It made me look good, responsible. You know how these companies eat that stuff up." Julian rubbed his temple. "Maybe she said something." Brielle's head snapped up. "She wouldn't dare. But I already had." That same evening, Julian tried to withdraw money from a joint credit line he'd opened months earlier under my name, something he assumed I hadn't discovered. But I had, and I'd closed the account. He burst into the kitchen in a fury. "Why is my card declining?" I didn't even look up from my crossword puzzle. "Because the line of credit you opened under my identity has been shut down. I reported it as fraudulent." He stared at me like I'd punched him. "You did what?" I circled a word on the puzzle. "Betrayal." "I made a decision," I said. "Something you do when you're legally in control of your own life." "Do you know what you've done?" he seethed. "That was how we were paying for everything." Brielle appeared in the doorway, wild-eyed. "You're insane. That's our future." "No," I said quietly. "It was mine. You were just trespassing on it." The final blow came the next morning. Julian's company, an underwhelming startup he'd been courting investors for, held its quarterly pitch meeting. He dressed up, practiced lines in the mirror, even kissed Brielle's cheek before leaving. He didn't know that 2 days earlier, I had received an anonymous letter. It was neatly typed, unsigned. "Elaine, your son submitted a proposal to our board using falsified asset documentation, including your home as collateral. Thought you should know. A friend." I forwarded the letter to the board directly, attaching the proof I had. The trust deed in my name, Julian's unauthorized paperwork, and a notarized affidavit stating I had no involvement or agreement with any business venture tied to him. At 3:12 p.m., Julian returned home pale, silent. He dropped his laptop bag at the door and collapsed onto the couch. "They fired me," he whispered. Brielle froze. "What?" "Fired? They said I misrepresented collateral, that I submitted forged files." He turned to me slowly, eyes brimming with confused rage. Did you send something?" I didn't blink. "I protected myself, that's all." He buried his face in his hands. Brielle began pacing, muttering about ruined chances and wrong timing. No one asked me how my day was. That night I served dinner, stuffed peppers and rosemary potatoes. Neither of them touched a bite. I ate in peace, savoring the silence. Later, in the dark of the hallway, I heard them whispering again. Maybe she's losing it, Brielle whispered. Maybe we can still convince someone she's not fit to live alone. Julian sighed. There's still the hike. If we frame it right, I didn't need to hear more. The next morning, they brought it up over breakfast, softly, sweetly. Let's go for a hike, Julian said. Fresh air, time to bond. I smiled and nodded. Sounds perfect. Let them plan. Let them carry snacks. Let them choose the trail. Because what they didn't realize was this. They weren't the only ones walking into a trap. The wind at Hollow Pine Ridge always carried a strange hush with it, as if the trees knew secrets too heavy to speak aloud. As we ascended that morning, the ground was soft with dew, the path steep enough to quiet unnecessary conversation. Julian walked ahead, checking over his shoulder now and then, not to ensure I was keeping up, but to confirm I still followed. Brielle stayed beside me, smiling too much, complimenting the view, the air, even my youthful pace. But I knew she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the version of me she hoped still existed, the one who was blind, hopeful, easily tricked. I played my part. We reached the summit by noon. The overlook was breathtaking, vast stretches of pine and stone, a fall so deep it made the silence ring. Julian set down his backpack, pulled out a bottle of water and 2 energy bars. He offered one to me. It's electrolyte boosted, he said, voice calm. You should rest a bit, Mom. I smiled, accepted the bottle, raised it to my lips, didn't drink. He handed me an energy bar. I peeled it open, made a show of chewing, didn't swallow. Because earlier that week, I had discovered their stash of diazepam in the cabinet above the fridge, behind the vitamins they never used. I'd taken a few pills, ground them carefully, and added them to their energy bars. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't race. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Minutes passed. Brielle started yawning first. Then Julian's words began to slur slightly. You tired? He asked, blinking slowly. A little, I said softly, but not nearly as much as you. He furrowed his brow. What? That's when he stumbled sideways, dropping the water bottle. Brielle gasped, clutched a nearby branch for balance. What did you... I stepped back, watching them both sink slowly onto the mossy earth. I didn't touch your drink, I said calmly, but I did notice how obsessed you both were with mine, so I made a simple trade. Julian tried to stand. His legs gave out. You'll be fine, I added. Eventually, just a bit sedated, enough to keep you from doing something permanent. I turned and walked back down the trail, each step solid, controlled. The breeze carried no guilt, only clarity. By the time I reached the ranger station 2 miles down, I was just another hiker with a minor sprain. I limped convincingly, accepted help. An ambulance was called. No one asked too many questions. And that's how I met Dr. Rowan Hale. He wasn't part of the plan. He was part of the story I never thought I'd get to write. I met him in the ER as they treated my ankle injury. He was quiet, mid-50s, graying at the temples, with kind eyes and a presence like steady rain, gentle but undeniable. He offered me water, asked if I had anyone to call. I said no. Want some company while you wait? He asked. I nodded. He sat beside me, and for the first time in years I told someone a piece of the truth. Not the whole story, just a shard. A widow. A son who'd gone astray. A home full of tension. Rowan didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He simply listened. When the nurse returned, he stood and said, If you ever need someone to talk to again, I'll be at the community health center 3 days a week. He handed me a card. No promises, just a gesture. I took it, pressed it into my pocket like a lifeline. Back home, the silence in the house was different. I had always known silence as loneliness. Now, it felt like peace. Over the next few days, while Julian and Brielle recovered from what the hospital believed to be exhaustion and poor hydration, I began to reclaim my life. I emptied the guest room, changed the linens, donated their excess clutter. I opened my windows, played old jazz records,
Cooked for myself again. Simple things, full of warmth, not obligation. Then one afternoon, Rowan called. Just checking in. How's the ankle?
Better, I said truthfully. He hesitated, then added, You said something that stuck with me, about not knowing if you'd ever feel safe again. I was quiet. I hope you know, he said. You're allowed to build something new. You don't have to rebuild what broke. We met for tea the next week, then walks, then book club, then dinners. He never rushed, never tried to fix me. He simply made space. Space for me to remember who I used to be before I became a full-time provider of unconditional love to people who saw it as currency. One afternoon, I showed him the herb garden I started: mint, basil, lavender. He smiled. You're creating again. I nodded. For the first time in a long while. Later that week, I received a letter. Julian's name had been removed from the startup's investment roster. Brielle's application for her promotion had been declined due to integrity concerns. None of it brought joy. But it did bring closure. Sometimes, the rebirth doesn't begin with joy. It begins with absence, and from there, something new takes root. The letter arrived without a return address, just my name in elegant cursive across a cream envelope. It was early spring. I had just clipped a few sprigs of lavender from the garden, the air rich with scent and quiet. I placed the letter on the kitchen table, poured myself tea, and stared at it for a full hour before opening it. Inside was a single page. Elaine, I heard what happened from someone at the hospital. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm dying. And before I go, I need to tell you something. Please, if you can find it in your heart, meet me once, just once. Room 427, Tuesday, 11 a.m. D. There was only one person it could be. Derek, my ex-husband, Julian's biological father. The man who walked out when Julian was barely a toddler, choosing another woman over a life that, to him, felt like too much weight. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 30 years. The idea of seeing him made something ancient stir in my bones. Not fear, not anger, just the cold echo of unfinished grief. I considered tearing the letter in half, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the word dying. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe after all I had faced, I finally had the strength to look back without flinching. The hospital hallway was quiet, the kind of sterile calm that always feels too rehearsed. Room 427 was near the end. I paused outside the door, my hand hovering near the handle. Then I knocked once and stepped in. Derek looked like a ghost version of the man I once knew. Gaunt, sunken-eyed, oxygen tubes trailing from his nose. But his eyes, they were the same cold steel blue. He looked up and froze. Elaine. I nodded. Derek. He tried to smile but winced. Didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't. There was a long silence. I'm not here for forgiveness, he said quickly. I know I forfeited that. Good, I replied. We can skip the apologies. He gave a weak laugh. Still sharp. I sat in the chair beside the bed, crossing my arms. Why now? His voice was thinner than I remembered. Because I couldn't let go without telling you. You were right, about everything. I tilted my head. Be more specific. I was right about a lot of things. He smiled again, weaker this time. About Julian, about what I gave up, about how I thought walking away would make life easier. It made mine harder, I said bluntly. And it made Julian's confused. He nodded slowly. I know. I've watched from afar. Birthdays, graduations, the wedding. I wasn't there, but I read what I could. I even sent gifts. He never told you. I shook my head. He didn't. That tracks. Derek looked out the window. He came to see me. Once, about 5 years ago. I blinked. He never told me. He didn't come for me, Derek said softly. He came for money. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. I gave him 10,000, told myself it was reconnection, But he never came back. I sighed. That's who he became. That's who I allowed him to become. Derek looked at me, something breaking behind his eyes. I wanted to believe he was better than me. But he's worse. And I'm scared he won't stop until he loses everything. He already has, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. Silence again. This time, softer. Why did you really call me? I asked. To confess? To unburden your soul? He reached shakily to the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a sealed envelope. Number to give you this. I took it. What is it? My will. I'm leaving what little I have to a foundation, but there's a note in there confirming that Julian was never legally adopted by you. You took him in, raised him, but he was never yours. Not by law. I know, I said quietly. But he was mine by sacrifice. Derek's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to say thank you, he whispered, for raising him when I ran. I stood, folding the will into my purse. I didn't do it for you. I know. I walked to the door, then paused. You were the first person to betray me, I said, but not the last, and not the worst. Then I turned and left. That night, I found Rowan on my porch, waiting with 2 cups of tea. You're quiet, he said gently. I saw someone I once loved, or thought I did. Closure? I nodded. The kind that doesn't change anything, but confirms everything. We sat in silence as the wind rustled the lavender. Rowan took my hand. You look lighter. I smiled faintly. Maybe because the ghosts are quieter now. It was dusk when I closed the final drawer, sealing away the last of the past. The house looked different now, lighter. There were no more items I kept for sentimentality's sake. No photo frames of Julian's younger years. No echo of the mother I had once played like a role written in guilt and regret. The walls were painted in softer shades now, moss green, slate blue. I had replaced the heavy curtains with sheer ones, replaced obligation with openness. And in the center of the living room, where Julian once stood demanding the deed to my home, I now kept a sunlit table with only 2 chairs, one for me, one for Rowan. That evening, I received a call from the hospital. Ms. Reed, the nurse said gently, your son and daughter-in-law were brought in this morning, collapsed in their apartment. Malnourishment, dehydration, likely stress-induced. I didn't speak. They've been stabilized, but the damage is likely long-term. They'll need ongoing support, weakness, memory fog, cardiovascular strain. What do you need from me? I asked flatly. Well, they listed you as their emergency contact. I took a long breath. I'm no longer their emergency anything, I said. Then I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just stillness. I walked to the garden and stood among the herbs, my mint, rosemary, and lavender all thriving. I bent down, clipped a few sprigs, and breathed in deeply. That scent used to remind me of my mother's kitchen. Now it smelled like myself. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, the same scrawled penmanship I recognized from birthday cards long ago. Mom, I don't remember everything. Brielle says it's the hospital meds. I think it's guilt. You probably don't want to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you. But I need to say this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. And I think I always have been. Love, Julian. I folded the letter quietly, not with bitterness, not with hope, just with finality. Some apologies arrive when there's no one left to receive them. Rowan and I made dinner that night, grilled vegetables, lemon-roasted chicken, and mint tea. He set the table while I finished plating. We ate outside, under the warm hue of string lights I'd strung along the patio. I got a message from my sister today, he said. She wants to come visit. Family? I asked. He smiled. Not always easy, but sometimes worth the risk. I nodded. Sometimes. He looked at me, careful. Do you think you'll ever talk to Julian again? I paused, watching the steam rise from my tea. I don't know, I said honestly. But if I do, it won't be as his mother. It'll be as someone he once knew, who found her way out. Rowan reached across the table, took my hand gently. You've created a beautiful life, he said. Not beautiful, I corrected. True, finally. 1 week later, I dropped off a donation box at the local community center. Inside were clothes Julian and Brielle had left behind. I didn't list my name on the form, just left it there and walked away. As I stepped back into my car, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the Graham Group. Notification, personnel profile, Colin Dawson, final removal confirmed. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the app. I didn't need updates on their downfall. I had moved past the collapse. I was building legacy. Months passed quietly. Rowan and I planted tulips. I joined a reading circle. I began writing again. Essays, letters I never sent, memories I wanted to keep only for myself. Then, on a soft fall evening, he turned to me on the porch and asked, "Do you think you could ever fall in love again?" I looked at him, calm and certain. Maybe I already am. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed my hand. And that was enough. Sometimes, we think the ending is the moment the house is reclaimed or the betrayer is punished. But it's not. The real ending is quieter. It's the first day you make coffee without feeling like someone else deserves it more. It's the afternoon you plant something and know you'll be alive to see it bloom. It's walking through your own front door and not flinching when the silence greets you. It's knowing your life belongs only to you. That's where my story ends, and where my legacy begins.